My name's Sue Ditta, and I'm the Executive Director of the Electric City Culture Council. And you were just hearing from Gabe Pollock, who's coordinating this program and everything around International Poetry Month. EC3 is overall responsible for the Poet Laureate program. The city provides the funding. And I'd also like to introduce Nick Ferrio, who has served on a Poet Laureate jury and has a lot of experience in grant writing and nominations and all of that kind of process and procedure. Yep, and is, as many of you will know, an incredibly talented musician. And Ziysah, who is our wonderful Poet Laureate currently, we've been so proud to have her represent the city in that role. And it's been a joy working with you. And she's going to help cheer on anybody and everybody who might like to see if they're eligible and apply for the program. So the Sarah Lewis, unfortunately couldn't be here with us. She was going to lead us in a new territorial acknowledgement. I think this is our older one, but I'll go ahead and read it. And Gabe, if you can make it come up.
Yeah, so I don't have it in the slideshow, but we respectfully acknowledge that the land on which we're gathering today is the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe, home to the William Trees First Nations, who have been the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters for countless generations. We support them in their work, which they continue to this day. We're grateful to be here, and we pledge to listen to and learn from the traditional Indigenous knowledge and ways. EC3 is committed to doing all that we can to further efforts at real truth and reconciliation, which includes providing support to the artistic work of Indigenous artists, examining the ways we do this, and providing a space and a platform for Indigenous voices to be heard and respected.
Sarah Lewis is going to be leading some workshops for EC3 on territorial and land acknowledgements coming up in June, so stay tuned for information on those. Tonight, though, we want to talk about the Poet Laureate program. It's a program that EC3 is really excited about. It is something that came out of the grassroots of the community with John Hederwick and a couple of other people who really wanted there to be a Poet Laureate program and had been talking to the city, and then they turned to EC3 for some help on getting the program the last mile, which we were able to do. And everybody did quite a bit of research on Poet Laureates, and as our first slide says, it is a centuries-old tradition. Poet Laureate is an appointed artist who primarily composes and presents poems at official occasions. So sometimes people confuse Poet Laureates with troubadours or town callers, and town criers, but it's a really specific thing that has come and gone in different countries around the world over the centuries, and in the last 20 to 25 years, at the municipal, provincial, and federal level, there's been a real flourishing of interest in the idea of having a Poet Laureate be part of the city's artistic and cultural life. And I think one of the other exciting things is the notion of the Poet Laureate has expanded from traditional page poets to include spoken word poets. And as most of you will know, our first two Poet Laureates are primarily spoken word poets, although Ziysah, I know you're working on the publication of a book. You're transitioning in an artistic way. Yeah, okay. So I think it's been wonderful to see how City Council has responded to the idea of the Poet Laureate, and I'll just remind people that in this election cycle, when Mayor Jeff Leal and all of the new councillors were inducted and made officially appointed as our legal representatives for the city of Peterborough, they invited Sarah Lewis to speak. She did, and when she finished, everyone in the room stood up and clapped. So I think we've already established the Poet Laureate as a really, really important position, and someone who not only brings grace to official occasions, but really is able to speak to us in a different kind of voice about the important issues of the day and how they impact us as citizens of Peterborough. So here you can see some of the technical language that we use to describe the program. We see the Poet Laureate program and the appointment of a Poet Laureate as being very much actualizing and enacting the strategic plan pillar in the City of Peterborough's strategic plan of community well-being, and really contributing different voices, different ideas, different perspectives on what goes on in the City of Peterborough and what brings us together as a community. So you can see some of the technical things, and these things are really important if you're being nominated and proceeding with an application. Everything in this PowerPoint will be available on our website so that you can reference it as you develop your application and work with your nominator on a nomination. Traditionally, Poet Laureates also play a really special role in emphasizing the value of literacy and the literary arts by building a deeper knowledge and understanding of our history and our lives and where we live. But also I think we've really seen with both Ziysah and Sarah schools, public schools and high schools, taking up the Poet Laureate, bringing them into the classroom to give kids a different way of thinking about the importance of literacy, of reading, of writing, and of expressing themselves with the written word. It is an honorary position, and I think somewhere else in the slides we put little exclamation marks around the word honorary, because it means, I think, a couple of things. One is the amount of money the Poet Laureate gets paid is probably not sufficient, although it's as much as most cities pay, except for Toronto, I think. But there is a kind of honorary aspect to it because it's a very challenging selection process. You have to go through a two-stage competition to be appointed the Poet Laureate. It is an honor to have that position. And it is a position where you're speaking to the honor and value and importance of our city. Many of you will read on the official emblem and coat of arms of the City of Peterborough, our motto in Latin, which translates into English as what nature has endowed us with, the arts expand or enhance. And I think that's something that the Poet Laureate does. It expands and enhances our experience of living in the city and of our civic identity. So I've told you a little bit already about the history of the program. The very first term with Sarah Lewis was exceptionally successful. Sarah was much in demand. And EC3 worked with the city to arrange her official presentations and performances, most of which were at city council meetings, one of which was at the Civic Awards, and then the presentation and performance she did at the induction of the city councillors was something the mayor asked for separately and the city paid for separately. She did about 70 additional engagements. A lot of people called EC3 or emailed EC3 because they didn't know much about Sarah and didn't know how to reach her. So we connected her with the people who were interested. And one of the roles we could play as an arts council was to remind people who wanted her to speak that they needed to be able to pay her an artist fee. And that was separate from the $2,000 honorarium she got. And I think, except for one service club that will remain nameless, we were successful in making that happen. And we left it up to her as to what the Poet Laureate asked for in terms of fees, and maybe Zizi, you can talk about some of your experiences there. Here's a fantastic photographs of our 2 poet laureates. We're so proud. So we had, Sarah wrote a very good report at the end of her tenure. We have continued to work with John Hedderwick, who until this year, about 2 or 3 months ago, was the official advisor to the program. So initially the Arts and Culture Advisory Committee approved the rubric and the eligibility criteria, the assessment criteria, everything to do with the program through a subcommittee. So there was a little subcommittee that worked on it, then it went to the advisory committee. John continued to be our advisor, and finally council. The City of Peterborough City Council has to approve the final recommendations. It's the only program that EC3 runs where the city has the authority, contrary to other reports which you might read, where the city has the authority to determine the policy and framework of the program. So we went back to the advisory committee with John's advice and Sarah's advice. We chatted with Ziysah about it, and the advisory committee recommended and city council approved that it would become a 2-year position. So when the jury meets this year, they will be appointing someone for a 2-year period to make 8 official civic presentations over those 2 years, and there will be 2 $2,000 honorariums. It was felt that this would give the Poet Laureate a longer term to build relationships with the community, for the community to get to know the Poet Laureate, and particularly for them to develop their legacy project. And also we heard from some poets in the community who applied that pulling together a nomination and applying for every year was an awful lot of work. And maybe it made more sense for everybody to make it every other year. We looked around the country. There are a number of municipalities and provinces that make it a 2-year appointment. So we were able to get that approved as well. And I think everybody's pretty happy about that. In all of our programs, EC3 is very seriously committed to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, sometimes known as IDEA. And that means that we reach out in very specific ways to marginalized and racialized equity-seeking communities. We ensure that they are represented on our juries and on our board of directors and on any advisory groups that we have. And this also applies to issues around accessibility, both physical accessibility, intellectual accessibility, and issues around vision and hearing and hard of hearing and deaf artists. It's so important to remember that all of these artists are part of our city and part of our community and must be included as part of our work in the arts, and that we do everything we can to make it possible for them to participate in an equal way. So we'll get to the technical aspects of eligibility in terms of geography, but again, geography isn't the only important issue. Every aspect of eligibility matters in all of our programs, and certainly matters in the Poet Laureate position, because the voice very much needs to reflect the lived experience of a diverse group of people. So now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of the program. I'm going to go through some of it, and then Gabe's going to take over with regard to the support material, because the technical aspects of the support material are really important and a little bit more technical. Gabe will be the person receiving the applications. He'll be answering most questions that come in. He and I consult if there's things that he's not sure about. And then when we do the jury, Gabe is now an absolute pro at administering everything around the jury. We're very lucky to have him. Here's just some more exciting rubric about the goals and objectives of the program. We wanted people to be particularly conscious in their nomination about what the Poet Laureate's roles and responsibilities are. So I've told you some of them already. So you've got the details, and this PowerPoint will be available on the website. You know, about what you do as your civic responsibilities. Ziysah's taken on International Poetry Month in April as her legacy project, really. So it's quite expanded from what EC3 has ever done before. Sarah Lewis did something a little bit different. She did, I think, 3 outside events, particularly focused on the Indigenous community, and she did a number of workshops at the library and a couple, I think, maybe even at the Garnet. Why do I think that? Is it that long ago that it could have been at the Garnet? Yep. For younger poets. So her focus was on emerging spoken word artists. So now we'll jump into eligibility. So, really critical to understand, it's a 2-part process. The Poet Laureate has to sign off documents, which you'll find on the website, saying they want to be involved, and there's specific things that the potential Poet Laureate has to complete in an application. Proposals for their legacy project, providing a bio and a CV, as well as putting together all of the support material. And the nominator is really charged with writing a persuasive letter that responds to these goals and purposes, the roles and responsibilities, telling the jury why they think this person would really fulfill the role of a Poet Laureate for the city of Peterborough. So it's a 2-part process. Both things really matter. So here's the technical eligibility questions. In terms of geography, you must be a current resident, and we'll actually ask you to prove that you are a resident of the city of Peterborough or Peterborough County, including Hiawatha or Curve Lake First Nations. You have to be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or person upon whom refugee protection has been conferred and who is legally entitled to work in Ontario. So that last piece is a very technical one provided by the Government of Canada that's really the eligibility threshold for all kinds of things that new Canadians might want to do when they arrive here. Your nominator wants to talk about, we hope, why you would be able to accept the responsibilities of the position. You and the nominator have to demonstrate that you're accustomed to public presentation, citizen engagement, and community outreach. There are some very technical publishing requirements that we'll outline later, and you have to meet there's different ones for spoken word and for page poets, and we've got, you know, some flexibility there, but you have to be able to meet those criteria. And your nominator and you have to speak to the contribution that you've made to poetry or spoken word arts and the literary life of the municipality and or the surrounding region. And again, the surrounding region is Peterborough County, including Curve Lake and Hiawatha First Nations. Okay, so if you think of yourself as a print or page poet, the nominee must meet at least one of the following publishing criteria. And I'll flip to those in a minute. Sometimes there are gray areas when people apply and their nominators hand in their nomination about what a published text is, and the selection committee, which is the jury, they can determine if it's a gray area whether or not they think it meets the eligibility criteria. Okay, 26. So you need one book of poetry published by a literary or trade publisher, or one self-published book of poetry professionally marketed and distributed as determined by the selection committee. So it's not uncommon in the printed page poetry world for people to produce a chapbook and then work with professional marketing people to distribute it, to sell it, to get royalties from it. And that really is going into the next one, 2 chapbooks. The other possibility is a body of work that demonstrates professional commitment and proficiency, which includes poetry published or presented in professional markets. This can be any combination of chapbooks, broadsheets, anthology contributions, or publications in literary magazines. So again, as you start to develop your practice as a page poet, it might be a while before you get a published text, but you might have 6 or 7 or 8 poems that have been published in adjudicated literary magazines or journals of poetry, and you can argue a case that they are equal to or constitute a published book. And I think that we've had a number of people who fell into that category. Spoken word artists, we really worked hard with the spoken word community to develop the eligibility criteria there. We also had some experience and some knowledge that we could draw on in other municipalities that had already started to include spoken word artists. You have to have a body of work that demonstrates professional commitment and proficiency in the field of spoken word poetry. And again, the selection committee does have the purview to decide yay or nay on that, but that body of work can include something on slide 29. A recorded studio album of spoken word poetry, participation on a spoken word team, including touring and competing for at least 2 years, 3 curated featured performance sets of at least 15 minutes each, which I think if you're a spoken word poet, that has real meaning for you, because it's sort of like, you know, being part of the small literary press world. These are really established institutions and formats in which people develop their practice and present it in a professional context. You may have your work appearing in print materials, again, including chapbooks, anthology contributions, publication in literary magazines, but when Gabe will get to some of the technical stuff, we offer you the opportunity to have videos of your performances and presentations at spoken word competitions. And again, commitment to the community through teaching or creating performance spaces for other artists, which is sort of equal to, on the printed page side, community engagement, public readings, working in schools, that kind of thing. Nominators. In the nomination letter, please outline in detail the nominee's performance history and involvement in the spoken word arts community. In the support materials, please also include links to any audio tracks or videos that the selection committee can listen to or view online. So while your personal testimony in your nomination letter is super important, there actually has to be real things that the selection committee, the jury, can take a look at. And that's really important to know, to have good video, If you're going to be in performances between now and the application deadline, make sure that there's someone there videotaping your work, just as you will make sure the best possible work is handed in if you are a page poet. This is a two-part selection process. So the committee reviews all of the written applications, the nominations, they review the support material, and they rank everybody. The published criteria we take very seriously, and we make the committee give an actual mark for every single assessment criteria. Gabe pushes the magic buttons, calculates everything, and we take a look at who are the 3 highest ranked applicants, and if the committee still thinks they're the most significant people, they are asked to participate in phase 2 of the selection process, which is an interview. So this is something that's, I think, quite unique to Poet Laureate programs because it is an honorary civic position. The selection committee wants to have a sense and understanding of how you present your work in public, how you might respond to an audience, and you actually, well, during COVID it was online. I think you were online as well. This year we're hoping it can be in person. You actually perform and present some of your work to the selection committee. So here are some of the details on the nomination letter. This is a really critical one I want to emphasize. The nomination letter should really address the assessment criteria. And as I know Nick will tell you, doesn't matter what you're applying for, whether it's a grant or something like this, in your application, in the nomination letter, in your text as an applicant, it's really important that you say something about the assessment criteria. What do you do? How do you do it that meets the assessment criteria? And the letter of intent from the nominated artist is really where you get to say how you would approach being a poet laureate and how your previous experience would contribute to your work as the poet laureate. And Gabe, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a bit about the support materials.
Sure. So as part of your application, you're encouraged to submit up to 5 examples of your work over the past 10 years. There's an area of the form for that where you can put in the names of the works and a short description of what they are. If it's written word, we encourage you to just attach that as part of the email. Do it in doc or docx format or PDF. I always recommend PDF because, especially with poetry, where the form of it and the spacing and all that, you want to make sure that it's in the that it's all exactly correct and exactly as you intended. So PDF is very good for that. However, really, as long as it's in a readable format, that's fine for us. For audio and video, which particularly can apply for spoken word artists, the best thing to do is to provide a link, to include a link kind of in that box on the nomination form, to upload it to, for video, YouTube, Vimeo, for audio, Bandcamp, SoundCloud, services like that, or just an online storage thing like Google Drive, Dropbox, something like that, that the selection committee can assess. As Sue mentioned, I go through all of the applications, and if there is any kind of technical issues with accessing your support materials, I will be in touch. As I've said before, this is you're not being assessed on your technical expertise, your ability to submit things in the right format. So if there are issues, I'll work with you on that.
You be a nominator?
As someone who's working with EC3, I'm not qualified. I'm not able to be.
Who are nominated?
Yeah, we can get into exactly the qualifications for a nominator. There are conflict of interest guidelines that preclude anyone who is directly involved with EC3 or leave the city from participating as a nominee, but a nominator can be anyone who knows you well and knows about your contributions to the arts, and is a resident of the city of Peterborough, basically.
So it doesn't have the same requirement of being citizen, permanent resident?
Let's see, we do have that a bit earlier, so we can double check. The eligibility for the nominators, the nominators do have to be a resident of Peterborough or Peterborough County, Canadian citizen or permanent resident or refugee, and 18 years old. And the primary thing there, must know the artist nominee, be familiar with their work, be able to comment knowledgeably on their ability to undertake the duties, and they can't be directly related through family or employment connections. And they may only nominate one artist per year, because otherwise they would just create drama. You're saying multiple people, and then they get mad at each
Need a
other.
monogamous nominator?
Yeah, we don't believe in polygamy.
Polyamorous nominators. Are you
Poet laureates for non-monogamous nominations.
That's right. I don't know, and this community tends to have enough drama in the competition as it is. Like the EC3 board members can't nominate, our advisory committee members can't nominate, staff can't nominate, city employees can't nominate, but anybody else. The really crucial thing is to find someone to nominate you who knows your work well and who can write themselves, because they have to convince this selection committee that you're the one.
Or you write it and get them to sign the letter.
So we've heard that sometimes the poet will write the letter themselves and get the nominator to sign it, and that's none of our business.
It is certainly acceptable if you're interested in being nominated to find someone who's willing to nominate you. That's absolutely allowable for it to be kind of put forward by the nominee, who then will find someone to work with, who's willing to do the work there.
So just because I really want to give you a good opportunity to listen to the terrific artists we have with us tonight, I'm going to just skip to the selection committee. I've been moving back and forth between the language selection committee and jurors, because as a community you're more used to the term jurors, but in fact technically the final decision has to be approved by the city's Arts and Culture Advisory Committee. So we should be always calling this a selection committee, but so far the selection committee the advisory committee has always said, yay, well done, selection committee. We haven't had a problem of not being able to get to consensus. You were on one of the juries, I think, Nick, and if you have never been on a jury before, it may be shrouded in mystery for you. You may think people just vote for, their best friend or the person that lives down the street, but actually it's about 6 hours of hard debate and discussion, 12 maybe, of review and discussion and comparing and contrasting. And
And we do, and the juries do really stick pretty closely to the assessment criteria. Like those are listed in the program guidelines. Here are the criteria that the jury will be assessing on, and they really do stick to those and score on those. It's pretty specific.
it doesn't matter if the person is cute, athletic.
But do your push-ups just in case.
That's for phase 2.
It has to be these assessment criteria, which are on slide 43.
Yeah,
The nice thing about Zoom is no one can tell how tall you are.
that's true. Really high, but no one can tell you're wearing stilts.
So again, when you're preparing your letter of intent as the artist, and when your nominator is preparing their letter, they should address these assessment criteria and try and demonstrate your contribution to the field and the impact of your work. What tells us about your excellence in the practice? What examples can you give of your citizen engagement? What workshops have you done? What school performances have you done? anything where you've actually been involved with the community. And you will be asked, as you saw in what the potential poet laureate has to outline in their letter of intent, what your goals and objectives are as the poet laureate. Gabe, I see one thing here I forgot, I didn't catch. It's not over the 1-year program, it should be the 2-year program. Yeah, we can correct that for the website. And I think that's all of the technical aspects of the program. We've got some great photographs of poet laureates in action and poets in action. I'm going to ask now if there are any questions, and then we'll go to the presentations. We invited Ziysah to be here as an acting poet laureate, a current poet laureate. They've had lots of experience, a pretend poet laureate, and Nick, because he's been on one of the juries. But if there are questions to date on what we've presented, happy to take those now. Any questions? No?
I've been making a living out of my poetry for 40 years, but I want to know, am I wasting my time here?
In the sense that you don't have the published material?
Well, I have my book of vegetable poems for children, but you know, that's my art form is not completely serious, but I think that it's valid nonetheless. And you know, I do have a number of songs I've written, and I have most of my performances are 80% my own material. And you know, we've talked about this, and I'm just wondering, is this just, am I just dreaming?
I don't think you're dreaming. I think at the moment the program doesn't particularly or explicitly include standalone musicians. There are lots of musicians who've also published poetry. They've published their lyrics as poetry.
Well, Bruce here is in the process of putting all my lyrics together. And I think, you know, if I were to read one of my songs, it would likely sound better than if I sing it.
So I think what we should think about is getting the two of you to go back and take a look at what we have here as the actual eligibility criteria.
Well, this is what I'm asking. There was a thing that said, if they think, if you people think it's possible, so that's the question I'm asking. You know, on top of everything, you know, this, that, and the other thing, I do have, the book of vegetable poems has actually sold pretty well.
Okay.
And I've sold it all over North America through the internet, and I have bookstores selling it. But, and of course my CDs have sold thousands and thousands.
Right. So, sorry, Daphne, can you just hold on till I answer Hank? So what I'm going to suggest, Hank, is that you and Gabe talk and we take a look at the technical eligibility criteria and see if we can come up with support material that would meet that criteria. The only hesitation, like I'm thinking of Bob Dylan, like there's been lots of books of his poems, of his lyrics published as
But he's not a resident
poetry.
interpreter.
No, he's not. But, so I can clearly imagine a place where a musician makes that transition into poetry and the work is received as a literary art form. The focus of the program is definitely on literary art forms and spoken word art forms as opposed to music. But that doesn't exclude you necessarily. I think we need to take a look at that support material and see if it qualifies. If it's even in at all a gray area, we put it in front of the selection committee and ask them to determine eligibility.
Well, I've done sort of my own kind of straw poll with different people, and they say, shit, yeah, Hank.
So I'm going to move along because we're recording this because we want people who weren't able to come tonight to be able to see what happened. So I'm going to turn it over, if I can, to Ziysah to talk a little bit about their experience as a poet laureate and anything, Ziysah, that you might say to potential applicants or nominators that they should keep in mind.
Monogamy first. Thank you. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for dealing with my ongoing humor, just how I stay alert. Yeah, it's been really wonderful being Poet Laureate. I guess it's been a year since it started, sort of an unusual starting time last year, but I just wanted to start by saying that the best thing about being Poet Laureate is the title itself, and even more so than like my own love of being, like it's really wonderful to say I'm the Poet Laureate of Peterborough. I love Peterborough, I love poetry. I don't really know what a laureate is, but I love it too. But the thing that really kind of surprised me and continues to is like the way that the idea of Poet Laureate delights people. Like in an unexpected way, just when it was announced for months afterwards, and still I bump into people and they're like, they say the words Poet Laureate and this thing happens on people's faces, like, and then I say, well, what are you hoping to see from the Poet Laureate? What do you think a Poet Laureate does? And they have no idea. They're just so delighted that we have a Poet Laureate. It's like, there's something like whimsical about it, or, and it's, I think, really symbolized for people that our city has committed to poetry as something important and vital, which maybe not everyone at the city would agree with, but that decision was somehow made, and thank you to everyone who worked on it. To make space for poetry, and something about that really delights people, not just poets. I think maybe, as we have our takeout poetry cart, so sometimes I think people are imagining like a poet pedaling around the city, peddling poetry. So that's, I think, just really wonderful that the program exists, and thank you to everyone who's been part of that. I did apply in the first year, so I've experienced not becoming the Poet Laureate as well. I think that's when you were with me.
I think so.
And we're still friends.
But they're still talking, I was just going to say that.
Wasn't me.
And I just wanted, I think one thing I really want to say to anyone who's considering applying is to apply. Because I was thinking, like, even for example, I was thinking for myself, maybe I didn't want to apply. I wanted to wait till like later in my career, because I've been a spoken word artist, but and I met the qualifications, but I've been writing and trying to get my writing published. And so I thought maybe I should get to the point where I meet that criteria, and then I could be Poet Laureate when I have like a published book and things like that. But it was a really important experience for me going through the application process. And so when I've talked to people who are like, oh, I don't think I have a chance of getting it. There's other poets with more experience. There's other poets who are more poety. It's still a wonderful experience to apply because of two things. One is preparing your application. If that's not something you've done before, if you haven't had to kind of sell yourself as a poet, it's really helpful to like create your CV and really collate everything from your experience about poetry, and then explain why you would be a good Poet Laureate. When I went through that process that first year, it actually really like built my confidence as a poet and as an artist, and helped me to take the next steps that I took in the meantime, doing other things in my artistic career. And then also the experience of the interview was really positive for me both times. I was really, the selection committee, who is on the selection committee is not ever made public, I believe.
Afterward.
Oh, it is after?
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't know going in who's going to be there. I think I asked because I was nervous the first year, and Sue said, no, you can't know until you arrive, and it was on Zoom, and so they let me in the Zoom room, and all of a sudden I saw this group of people, many of whom I knew and really like and respect, and I was surprised by there have always been people who are like really well respected writers and performers, from outside of Peterborough, from Peterborough. And I honestly just both times had this feeling of like almost like a surprise party. Like I was like, oh yay, I get to hang out with you all.
Gang's all here.
And so getting to talk, like getting to perform my poetry for Lillian Allen, who's now the Poet Laureate of Toronto, and one of the founders of dub poetry in Canada. I guess I can't, has it been a year? It has been a year, okay.
Their names are on the website.
Yeah, and Chet Singh is also an amazing dub poet. Charlie Petch, I didn't know. What happened was I performed my work, and I think it said like 1 or 2 pieces, so I did my piece, and then she said, oh, you can do another one. And I was like, oh, I didn't prepare anything else, and I said, does anyone have any requests? And Charlie said, it's been a really hard day, do you have a poem about trans empowerment? And I was like, I have written something about that I've never performed, and I dug it out and performed it, and it was like a very meaningful experience. As the first performance of it was in that interview. So yeah, that experience also was actually like really affirming regardless of the result. And I think if, for example, you think that you need to have more experience or would like to have more experience before you become the Poet Laureate, I still think it would be a really valuable experience to create an application, and if and when you get an interview, to be able to go through that process. And yeah, it will like prepare you for down the road as well as for other things. Or you might become the Poet Laureate, which is also great.
How flexible is your schedule of commitment?
Right, actually the job now. Okay, yeah, so the only official commitment of Poet Laureate is presenting 4 times to City Council, which I've done 2 so far. And the second one, there was like a cold in my family, and I asked, I think the day of, I was like, what's the policy at City Hall? Because I'm fine, but my kids are not. And they said, don't come. So they rescheduled it. So I know there's flexibility around the dates. And I've had some other events related, I would say, how was it put in there? Presenting at event, like city functions. There's been a couple that have come up, and I've just been invited by the organizers, and I was available, which is good. So I think, like Sue sort of explained, but besides those 4 commitments, it's sort of up, I would assume, it's up to you as the Poet Laureate to say if it fits in your schedule or not, if you want to do it or not. Also to negotiate an artist fee. I know EC3 is like, can advocate for the fact that you are required to be paid an artist fee, but they don't have like a set amount that's required. So that's something I've had to think through, like what I would require, or if I would have a different requirement based on what type of organization it is. Yeah, so I remember someone told me that Sarah had 70 engagements, so I was like, I'm gonna get 70 like Sarah, but I gave up on that pretty quickly because I was too busy.
So you didn't have to do 70?
I did not do 70.
Oh, no,
I haven't counted yet.
Yeah, you only have to do 4.
Yeah,
And
there's no requirement, and I thought maybe that competitive spirit would be good, but I don't know, I haven't actually counted, but I think that Sarah had a particularly amazing year, and I know she had like some things she already had on the go before she became Poet Laureate with the CBC and stuff like that, so she had a lot of exposure. But yeah, I have been doing a lot of school workshops and events, which I normally do anyways. So I would say for me, it's been a pretty similar to like working as a poet normally, except for the extra responsibility of being at City Council and being at occasional city events, and then yeah, the title and people being delighted by it, which is great.
QZ.
Thank you very much for doing our city a good job.
I guess one like other specific thing we were talking about, the letter from the nominator, is I think what happened with me is that my nominator, which is Jen Poole, thank you Jen, she's awesome, she wrote the letter but she put some kind of like bracketed areas where she said like, is this really what you did? Can you describe this a bit more? Because the nominator letter is supposed to speak to is it the assessment criteria or?
Yep.
And so she did look over my resume, but there were like some parts where she just wanted me to flesh out or articulate those things. So she's kind of like left little bracketed sections for me to add in some information. So you can work together on it. It can be a class project.
Absolutely, working together on it's
And
probably
that was
a good
another,
idea.
I forgot, that was the other amazing thing of doing the application, having someone nominate you and having to say why they think you would be a great poet laureate. And I forget what else. I think there's other ways to bring people's support into the application. So I think it's like a very affirming, like if you believe in yourself as a poet or you want to, it's a very like affirming process to go through.
Thank you. It's such a good way to look at it. I know sometimes people are devastated when they don't get something they apply for, but if you talk to really senior famous artists, they'll tell you that
Yeah, and I mean, you have
they
to
get
think about
turned
the
down
fact
for
that
things all the time.
you choose one poet laureate at a time, and we've had 2 so far. So I think also people are starting to think like, oh, there's a certain type of person they're looking for. So whatever Sarah and I have in common, which I'm honored for whatever we have in common, then people might think, oh, I have to be that type of person or that type of poet, but that's not true. It's that for whatever secret reasons we were chosen each year. But it's only 2 people. It's not a big enough sample group to make any kind of generalization like that. And I think that the more diverse range of poets that apply, the more the committee will be able to introduce a range of poet laureates.
I think it's one of the exciting things about the program, because it really is only in its 3rd year. We are still kind of defining what the poet laureate means, what the position is. And each new person adds a kind of different, a different point along the line. Oh, it can be this, or it can be this, or both in a type of person and in a type of how you engage as a poet laureate, what you do and that. And so I think it's exciting that each time it's someone different and that they do it in a different way.
I was asked what, like, is it only for spoken word artists? Because Sarah and I have both primarily been spoken word artists. And my thought on that is that such a big part of the assessment criteria is about community and about Peterborough. So it's not just about your work as a poet, it's about your connection to the community and how you bring poetry to the community. And I think that that happens a lot visibly through the spoken word community, because we're like out there visibly doing work, but it doesn't have to be spoken word. But I wondered if that had something to do with it. And so I guess that would be another piece of advice for spoken word artists or page poets who maybe aren't super confident yet, but are looking towards becoming poet laureate. Any kind of like community engagement, being at community events. A lot of events want poets and spoken word artists, and they don't know who to ask. So we're building a repertoire right now to put on the EC3 website, but you can like approach an event that is happening, like International Women's Day, or I don't know what's another day. I just went to that one. That's why it's on my mind. And you can say like, hey, would you like to have a poet at your event?
Canada Day events and all of that.
Yeah, or like people like Justin Millian and PJ Thomas are like always doing these like open poetry events, and so I think getting involved and getting like your face out there participating is probably a really big factor, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, that's the kind of thing that EC3 will get phone calls or emails about, is because it's a specific day. Some of these days are determined by the United Nations, other ones it's mysterious. Like next week it's International Jazz Day. I have no idea who decides that, and World Art Day is coming up. But just quickly, 2 things that Z touched on I want to follow up about. It is possible there will be someone not in Peterborough on the jury. That's because it's such a close community. We had to go outside to avoid conflict of interest. So we asked Lillian Allen to join the selection committee. because she has spent a lot of time performing and being artists in residence at Trent and knew the community quite well. And then we were thrilled when she was made Poet Laureate in Toronto. And secondly, see, I hope it's okay if I mention this, but you made good use of the Grants to Individual Artists program and applied for the research and development component to get some support moving your spoken word work to the page. So for us, it was really nice to see those programs intersecting with each other and helping people make sense of their practice.
Actually, something about that. So I got a grant. What's that grant called? What did you say?
Oh, the research and development component of
I
grants
applied
to
for a
individual
grant
artists.
from EC3 to work with a mentor who publishes poets, specifically focuses on spoken word artists, so that I could learn how to prepare my poetry for page publication. And I contacted this person, and she said, I just started my first mentorship group. There's 2 other people in the group. They both also have children, are trying to transition from spoken word to the page. Both of them are now poet laureates.
You're kidding me. Can you say
All 3 of us became poet laureates. Very weird. Poet laureate of Victoria, Marie, and Ziysah was just made the poet in place of Hamilton. It's a new program in Hamilton. They decided to call it Poet in Place, but it's a poet laureate. So I don't know what's going on with that, but if you want to take credit through the granting program.
I like to take a little bit of credit because almost nobody anymore has those research and development grants. In the olden days, they were at the Canada Council, they were called Arts Awards grants, and they were based on your previous work, and you could propose to do anything. And then everybody got all funders got very project fixated. So, but we wanted to introduce the idea of people, what do you need? Like, do you need to travel? Do you need to research? Do you need
so
to
used to that
go to a
project-based thing
mentorship
that
program?
John and I were actually going to apply to that grant to do a project. And the day before, I was
Switched.
like, John, I kind of want to work on my own work. And he was like, me too. And then he ended up coming up with that whole play you put on this year. So,
No,
yeah,
it's a good,
really, really
good little
inspiring.
program. Shows you what $50,000 can do.
Should we also hear from Nick Ferrio about
Nick who?
Nick Ferrio?
Nick Ferrio.
About the experience of being on the jury.
Nick is one of the most accomplished musicians in our city. And I think he's now, it's fair to say, an expert on grant applications of all kinds. He's an excellent juror, being incredibly articulate, always prepared, and working well in a team. Thanks for coming, Nick, and take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, so, I mean, we touched on, I wrote some notes, but we kind of touched on a lot of my notes in the presentation. But yeah, I've been on a number of different juries, EC3 juries, I've been on Ontario Arts Council juries, I've been on Canada Council juries, I've been on a bunch of different ones for different organizations. I've also applied to many funding bodies for my own music and for my own art and for helping other people over the years. So we kind of, I mean, we already said this a bunch, but I think like the biggest thing is like before you start, really make sure you're eligible. So like looking at the eligibility criteria and making sure that as a nominator or as a nominee that you're eligible just based on the criteria, because I don't remember if there was anyone on that specific one, but there's been on juries where it's just like this is so good but you're not eligible and it sucks. So it's and you know that somebody put a ton of work in and then they're not able to get it because they did live in Peterborough or they whatever. Make sure you have completed all the requirements in the application checklist. It's pretty basic, it's in the application, but
It sounds like if someone wanted, they could check in with Gabe and
100%.
make sure that they're eligible before they
Totally.
do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, make sure your application fits in within the parameters of the program description and the goals, and make sure you can deliver the roles and responsibilities. And like you said, like Hank was asking those questions, you know, how many things did you have to do? Like that's really important, I think, knowing those kinds of things. The big thing from being on the jury side or a selection committee side is like writing the application in a way that the jury can easily understand why you should be poet laureate or why the person you're nominating should be poet laureate. So like making it accessible to the juror in a way, because I remember, I won't name any names, but there's been like applications where it's just really hard to understand what, like maybe they're really academic, it comes from a really academic place and I don't know what they're gonna do, you know? Or sometimes it'll come from the opposite side where you're just like, I don't know what's going on here, like, you know? So you want it to be sort of like, you have to think like, who's your audience? Your audience is like 5 or 6 people in a room that are gonna try to figure this out.
Don't assume that they just know you.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big one too. And then one thing too.
The other thing, sorry. The other thing is that they're reading a lot of applications.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna
Okay, I'll let you
get at. It's like we read like at least now it's, I mean, maybe it's not better that it's digital because your eyes are staring at a screen and it gets exhausting. But back in the day, it used to be like OAC would give you like a big box full of paper, like thousands and thousands of sheets that would get mailed to your house, and you'd have to read through thousands of sheets.
That sounds way better than looking at the screen.
It's much better, but at least now it's like you can kind of not have this daunting box that's in your living room that you're like, I should read that stuff in there, but I have other things to do. One tip I have is, and it's a super simple one, is kind of repeat the language that's in the program guidelines. So if they use the term like excellence in practice or like citizen engagement or whatever, like repeating those phrases back really helps so that the juror knows, okay, they're actually talking about this specific thing in the program. What the experience of being on a jury, especially for this project, was like. So yeah, like you were saying, we kind of get a bunch of homework. We get all of your applications to read. We go through all of them. We watch all of the support materials. We read all the support materials. We listen to all the support materials. And then we kind of create a preliminary ranking of all the applications based on the criteria. So, you know, out of 5, or whatever the number might be. And then when we have our meeting, we kind of go through one of it. We go through in a circle. So, you know, I might present so-and-so's application and say, we're going to talk about so-and-so. And for me, I try to put myself in the shoes of the applicant and try to understand where they're coming from, what their goal with the project or goal with being the poet laureate is, and if it's feasible, like if they're actually going to be able to pull it off based on their history, based on the work that they've done. At the end of the day, this is an artist who's trying to do something that pushes their own boundaries and helps our community. So in general, I try to keep in mind that that's what they're trying to go for, and I try to give my best way of making sure that they can get those goals met through presenting to that group of other jurors. Does that make sense? So it's just kind of like trying to go to bat for somebody, but I try to go to bat for all of them to sort of come from a place of they're trying to do something positive rather than looking at it from like a judgmental way. Do you know what I mean?
Who to kick off the onion.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that. It's like let's try to find. It gets, and the thing is too, like once you get to a point where I don't know, like say like the year that you did win, everybody was like right at the top. Do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't like
It's hardly any
really
spread.
yeah, that's what I mean. It's like
Yes.
so it's hard to it was a difficult decision for the group of us to make. But yeah, but making it easier on the juror to sort of understand where you're coming from and what you want to do is probably the most important thing, because for me anyways, just because if it falls outside of the criteria, then it's easy to say this doesn't really fit, right? So if you can kind of make it what you're doing fit in with those criteria and is accessible to the jurors, I think that's the gist of it.
And I like what you said about using the words from the question.
Yes.
Because I noticed this. I was on a jury for OAC this year for the first time, and it's something I hadn't realized as an applicant, is that you're reading so much that it's actually really easy to miss something. And quite a few times someone would say, oh, this person didn't do such and such. And then someone else would say, oh no, I think they did. Like, look here on page 3. And so like, that's on the jury, like it is our responsibility to find those things, but if you want to make it easy, just make it like so clear, and also the things that you're like the most proud about, make sure they're really clear and take up a lot of space, because it is really easy, like if you hide something between two other things, it can get missed.
That using word thing, it also helps you ensure that you're framing it properly. That you, like if you're including the words, it means you are talking about the things that the jury is looking for as well.
And it signals the juror to be like, oh, they're talking about this now.
Exactly. It does.
Don't hide Easter eggs in there. I'm actually eating an Easter egg.
And I should maybe make it clear to the people watching the video that Gabe and I don't comment at all on the applications. We start with a different juror for each application, so no one voice gets more airtime or dominates. And really, particularly in Poet Laureate, there are not really any even technical questions that we ever have to answer. It really is up to the selection committee. And we certainly keep in mind the capacity of the people on the selection committee to work together as a team. We do choose people who we think can work towards consensus, who have enough experience in the practice to thoroughly process what's in an application and then have the capacity to discuss it with their colleagues. So.
Yeah, and the other thing too is just about support materials. Like, I think support materials is kind of your window, for the jury, it's the window into your work, right? So it's like, sometimes on some juries, people will submit things that they're kind of just expecting people to know who they are, or expecting people to know what their work is or whatever, and like then there's people on the jury who might have never heard of you or whatever. So it's like you really want to represent the best version of yourself within the context of what this, the Poet Laureate program is, or whatever the program is, and just sort of like, keeping in mind too, like I don't know if there's criteria as far as like lengths of support materials.
There are word lengths.
Yeah, okay. Because I know on some other juries I've been on, it's like, say a music one, they'll say like maximum, say 5 minutes, and then they'll submit something that's like 12 minutes long, and when you have 300 applicants, you're not listening to the whole 12 minutes, you're just listening to the first 3 minutes or whatever. Yeah. It's like things like that where you want to be presenting the best version of your work.
I'm curious because I know on the OAC panel, they were like, you can't, like if you do know something about the applicant that's not in the application, you can't use that as the criteria. So like that was a hard thing to get used to say like, oh, they forgot to mention this thing, but I know this thing, so you can't. And I'm curious about how that works in Peterborough, because it is such a tight-knit arts community. So it's not just they might not know about you, it's even if everyone does know about you, you have to explicitly state what qualifies you, right?
Yeah, if we thought that a juror was sort of getting off track with personal anecdotes or experience, we'd direct it back to what's in the support material. And typically, like on media arts juries or music juries, they will suggest an amount of time for the digital presentations, but the jury has the option to call it after. If after 2 minutes we tell the jury you can say whenever you want, you can go 1, and then if all 5 jurors go 2, 3, then you'll stop it. Sometimes that's because they don't want to look at any more for negative reasons, but sometimes it's because everybody's already persuaded and they know they want to go on and give the people that maybe they really need more time on time. And it's the same in ranking, let's not spend a lot of time on like dissing the people who are marked really low. That doesn't help anybody. If it's a unanimous no kind of thing, we move on fairly quickly. But we always give the jury the opportunity at the end. We have a little break, we come back and we say, are you happy with this picture? Is this the message you want to send to people in the competition? And that's really important. And it's hard for lots of artists to accept that it is a competition. I think it hurts sometimes because art is so personal and emotional, but you know, it is a competition, and we do the very best we can to make it transparent and as fair and democratic as possible.